the audience, if you raise your hand, we'll bring the microphone around. But as we start, maybe I could lead off with Tom on discretionary funding. Where do you think, because you've been studying it so long, where do you think we ought to focus? Where is the most waste, fraud, wasted dollars, you think, in the discretionary side?
Where isn't it? Government Accountability Office last week issued a report that talked about duplication among various programs. And two quick examples, 82 teacher quality programs. They don't know which one demonstrates whether a teacher is doing a good job or a bad job. So we know that there's a problem. We don't know which one to keep and which ones to eliminate. There are 56 programs across 20 agencies in the federal government to promote financial literacy from a government that acts as Tom Saving just told you. They're going bankrupt, and they're trying to tell us about financial literacy. So there are a lot of areas that can be done, and I thought the GAO report had a lot of saliency because the Washington Post, for the first time in many years, said, oh, you know all those things we said about waste, fraud, and abuse, the elimination of waste, fraud, and abuse won't save money? Maybe we were wrong. Look, we've all been involved in some organization or another where you can cut 10%, 20%, and become more productive. In Washington, the only way they think that you can become more productive is to spend more money. So congressmen, subcommittees, they have jurisdiction over some of these programs that were identified as wasteful. There were probably 20 other subcommittees because there are these 20 agencies that deal with this financial literacy question. So it's honestly not a matter of what's out there because it's evident. GAO even said, we've been talking about this for years, but you know what else they said? They said Congress is to blame because they haven't done anything about all of this. So we're hopeful that oversight and an explanation to the taxpayers of what programs are effective and which ones are not effective will result in more of these efforts to eliminate wasteful spending. Because I think you have to demonstrate why something isn't working, as opposed to just saying, well, I don't like it because the Democrats voted for it. That's not the way to get it done. You have to show why it doesn't work. Just like anything else, you would say, well, this product isn't selling, we're getting rid of it. And that's how they're going to have to do it. So there's a long list. Our Prime Cuts has a big list. And we should not exempt defense. Unfortunately, Republicans, to be honest, have voted many times to keep these defense earmarks in place. They vote to kill the non-defense earmarks. You're not included in that. But it was an interesting analysis to show that there's even favored spending among the Republicans. Everything has to be on the table. And that's the only way to do this.
Thanks. Thank you, Tom. In our Cuts Act, we put, I think, about $60 to $70 billion of defense cuts, all focused on procurement waste. But the defense buys, just forcing them to be 15% more efficient, just a little more efficient, and everything from supplies to weapon systems can create that types of savings. I noticed a few years ago there were 9 civilian workers at the Pentagon that made $170,000. Today there's nearly 1,000 civilian workers at that. We can cut in the Pentagon in those dollars.
Well, let me point out the Grace Commission, which was the predecessor organization to Citizens Against Government Waste, they helped expose the $436 hammer and the $640 toilet seat at the Pentagon. So we have a long history of working on these issues. I don't think those are around anymore, but we did once find 15 pages on how to bake chocolate chip cookies for the Pentagon. We weren't quite sure what they were worried about, whether at that time the Soviet Union was going to send bad chocolate chip cookies, but this is how the procurement system, and there have been procurement reforms for many years, so that's a great area to look for savings.
It's time. And Dr. Saving, why aren't lawmakers tackling Social Security, Medicare? We've known, you've been preaching this for a long, long time. President Bush attempted Social Security reform. To his credit, we in Social Security Committee, I can tell you, we spent a year doing nothing but town hall meetings on Social Security reform. It didn't get us anywhere. So, how do we compel lawmakers to finally tackle the elephant in the room?
I think the first thing that's going to happen within by 2020, because they're taking half of federal income tax revenues, you're going to have to do it. You don't really have a choice, and whether that's going to get done in the next 2 years or in the next Congress, but in this next decade, it has to happen, because you can't take that share of federal income. You're not going to be able to raise federal income taxes by 50%. Yep. That's not going to happen. Yep. And so since that can't happen, you're actually going to be forced to really do something. And I think it may take that, though, to get it done. Otherwise, it's hard. You know, the whole issue about the private accounts, and I know the White House sent me everywhere the president went. Several summers ago, I went the week before to talk about private accounts. It was a very difficult uphill fight, you know, and to do that. It's hard to get across ideas that you look like you're going to get something that's free. It's hard to get the public involved. And the public, we have to educate the public. They've got to tell you guys what you have. It's just like a firm that makes a new car. If the public doesn't like it, they're out of business. And that's what happened last November. And there's an opportunity now, I hope, to really do something. That's hard, though. This is not easy. It's hard.
That's what we learned in that whole year was that, you know, don't lead with the solution, lead with the problem. Because we spent the whole year convincing people just how bad a shape Social Security was in, you know, revealing to them there's no money in the trust fund. You know, the dollars that's filing cabinet in West Virginia, wherever it is, had no assets. Either that as you draw it, you had to come up with the money. And it really was a lesson in you got to educate, we got to pull, we got to convince the public that it's time. We don't have a choice on the entitlements. Let's take questions.
Yeah, Kevin, you know I'm a
Where you at?
I voted for you for 27 times.
Thank you.
I saw something here a while back about if we could just eliminate the sorry Department of Education, it would save $1 trillion a year. And then I know they were trying to do that, and he couldn't do that, and powerful as he was. Is it possible that our Democrats and our Republicans realize this situation is serious enough that they, you know, you save $1 trillion here and $1 trillion there, it starts to add up.
Real money. The answer is no, they don't realize it yet. And you can see the denial in Washington right now. I mean, look at this one. Look at the almost universal opposition to the savings we put in the House. In the Senate, you know, they're even more adamant. They call this taking a machete to the federal budget. That's $6 billion they proposed for cuts. That's 1/1000th of the federal budget, roughly 1/1000th. And they're saying we really can't spare any more than that. So we do have lawmakers who are in denial. And on education, truth of the matter is, Department of Education, in my view, has helped very few school children actually grow and learn and get a good education. Truth is, that is done at the local level, and the sooner we push that control and decision making to the local level, the better we'll be, I think.
Can I add something?
Tom, yes, sir.
$1 trillion is a little high in terms of the number. The Department of Education is about $30 billion a year. Even adding other education programs, maybe you get to $50 billion in the government, if that. But I agree with the congressman. Talked about generations. Your generation, my generation, pretty much everyone in this room grew up without a Department of Education. And I honestly think we're much better educated as a result. And my father was the president of our local board of education, which meant I could never skip school, but it also gave me a good understanding about what it takes to do these things at the local level. So whatever else we do, that to me should be on the top of anybody's list of agencies to eliminate. Now, they did eliminate a few programs. Even President Obama has agreed there are some education programs that are ineffective, Even Start and a number of others. So out of the 2-week continuing resolution, I think 4 or 5 education programs were eliminated. So that's 4 out of a very large list.
Thank you. Sir. Oh.
Kevin, since
Hey,
everything's
Henry,
on the table, I want to bring up about foreign aid. I recently saw a speech by Congressman Poe indicating that there, of the 192 countries in the world, that we gave foreign aid to some 150 of them, and that it was voted on in a continuing a resolution involving all of the countries, and that we were giving foreign aid, foreign aid to countries like Venezuela, Cuba, China, people that can hate us without us giving them money. And I'm wondering if his idea was to have these things voted on individually so that we wouldn't have to vote in a block, up or down. Is that a possibility, and that's going to happen?
Well, it is because of the new open process, Henry, in the U.S. House. whereas these appropriations bills coming forward later this summer and in the fall, 12 separate bills that fund the federal government. One of those deals with foreign aid and foreign relations. That will be an open process where lawmakers can bring forward those dollars for those countries as well. So yeah, you're going to see a new light shown on that whole area. And the truth of the matter is, there are dollars that serve our interest within foreign aid. There's no question about it. But we can't afford all the wasted dollars in foreign aid. We just can't. We don't have a choice.
I have one other question. How do you stand on a constitutional amendment for term limits? Would you support that?
You know, I have always supported that amendment in Congress to send it to the public. I do wish, though, we could find a way to do term limits on the bureaucrats as well in Washington, because that's one of our challenges as well. And I want to have the debate. I think it's a great debate to have. And one of the things we'll have to think about is do we want the freedom to choose our elected representative, or do we want to trade that off to make sure there are term limits on all? That's a good debate to have. I've always thought we should have it. So, Tom, any
I just
thoughts?
want to, again, foreign aid in the same perspective as education. What Tom Sabin is talking about is where the real money is. Look at the chart. When I first started working on Capitol Hill, which was a long time ago, 1980, those numbers were reversed. So you could eliminate all the discretionary spending. You're not going to solve the problem. Foreign aid is about $30 billion a year, again, similar to education. So there you've got, out of $3.7 trillion budget, 11%, it's nothing. So we understand there's important issues to discuss, but you really need to be paying attention to what he's saying, because that needs to sink in, it needs to be understood, and it needs to be addressed, because if we don't keep pressure on members to deal with this issue, we're just going to be looking at a very small piece of the budget.
Good. Yes.
Is it possible to go back to the Graham-Rudman type solution with overspending?
You know, it is. That's one of the ideas being bandied about on the debt ceiling vote. What are the structural budget reforms that we could achieve in that vote? Graham-Rudman was accomplished during the debt ceiling standoff. Looking at caps on spending, changes, making the budget a statutory law so that it prevents governments and Congresses from gaming those caps. I'd love to see a constitutional amendment, not just to balance the budget, but to balance it at a low level, 18%, 20 at maximum, 18% preferably. Those may be tough to get, but we need to cut up those credit cards going forward. I mean, we have to start, if a business is in this situation at their limit, families are in that limit, it's one thing, you have to pay your debts. There's no question about it, but you have to start cutting up the credit cards as well. So, your thoughts?
I agree. I want to correct my math, however, sorry. Believe it or not, the $60 billion for education and foreign aid is only 2% of the budget, because $30 billion is 1% of $3 trillion. Sorry.
But I'm still,
they're so big, you forget.
It is. I still have trouble throwing the trillions around that occurs. I mean, really, when I first got to Congress, that was not the case at all. A huge program was $100 million was a huge one. Now, if it isn't $1 billion, they think it's peanuts. It really is crazy.
There's another issue that as you have up on here, you have the net interest number, and one of the things you talked about was the share that the outstanding the publicly held federal debt. A lot of it owned by the Bank of Japan, a lot of it owned by the Bank of China. 50% of it owned abroad, of course, but that's not the real issue. The real issue is that 202 billion here, that's the net interest. That's the net interest at historically low interest rates and at a level of the publicly held debt that's half of what it's going to be in a decade. And interest rates are going to be, instead of on the average on the debt, which is about 2%, the 10-year debt, because the debt is very short, and so you can't sell longs in this market. if you doubled the debt and the interest rates go to where in the long run they usually are, that's going to be nearly $1 trillion, not 202 billion.
A year.
Yeah, a year.
A year.
A year.
Yeah.
It's going to be bigger than most of many of the things in this budget.
Yeah. And that's another gimmick in the current budget is
Exactly.
pretending you're going to have
Exactly.
low interest rates going forward, and it just doesn't happen. Oh,
Kevin, the federal judge has given the Obama administration 7 days for a response on the ruling that he made in Florida. What do you think the DOJ is going to do, and when do you think that response is going to be given?
well, they better comply with the judge's order. I tell you what, they ignored. If I know, talk about double standards. This had happened in the Bush administration, and the courts had thrown out a whole statute, guarantee of the hue and cry the next day. For them to stop that bill would have been unimaginable. This administration continued forward, even challenges the clarification, understanding of the court's ruling, and he came right back and said, I'll lift the stay. You have to appeal right now for expedited appeal at the Court of Appeals, Supreme Court. So this is all very encouraging because the sooner we can get a Supreme Court decision, the better. And at the heart of Obamacare, I don't care what anyone says, at the heart of it all, it's all wrapped around the core of that unconstitutional individual mandate. Take that away, the whole thing collapses. That's why it's so critical for us.
Mr. Congressman, I've been studying that chart up there. I'm just a simple man, but it's my belief that one of the fundamental responsibilities of the United States government is to provide for our defense. So if that's true, how is it that defense can be classified as discretionary? Shouldn't that be separated somehow, or you've got some kind of overlapping? I mean, I can understand that part of the defense budget can be discretionary, but not all of it. Or is some of that in other mandatory?
It is. That is actually discretionary, mandatory are budget terms that simply differentiate between budgets that are up for review each year by Congress and voted on versus mandatory spending that is by the formula that was set in law. It is driven as an entitlement for individuals going forward. So it doesn't necessarily represent their value to us as a nation, defense obviously being number one. It's just a budget term for the way we review it and allocate it each year. Defense isn't discretionary. It isn't optional. And anyone in here who's either served or have their kids, family, or me, my little brother in the military today, they understand it's mandatory. So. Hey, Scott.
Hey, how you doing, Kevin?
Good.
Thanks for being here tonight. I actually have a question for Mr. Saving over there. Are you familiar with Paul Ryan, his Roadmap for America 2.0? He has a plan for how to make Social Security solvent again, and it requires everybody under 55 to start investing in their own program that is untouchable by the federal government. Everybody over 55 gets to get what they have already. Are you familiar with that, and what do you think of it?
Well, in fact, I wrote several of those kind of things, to try to reform Social Security. The biggest issue with Social Security is you have no property right, and the Supreme Court decided that a long time ago. You don't own anything, but Congress can take it away from you anytime they want to. That was my argument, and when I met with the president many times, not this president, obviously, the past president, I said, Mr. President, in Texas, a handshake is a contract. And you ought to be able to shake hands with your congressman and know what the deal is. And the thing that private accounts give people is they give them ownership in something. And they have no ownership now, as Congressman said, these big numbers of Medicare and Social Security, those are laws that sit there, they're continuing, but they can be changed anytime. There's no reason for the Social Security to ever run a deficit. Congress can just take your benefits away anytime they want to. And what I said, this is the most important. We never got to enough of that. I don't think the administration did anyway, of explaining the benefits of ownership in something so that you can take, if they try to take it away from you, you can take them to court. If they try to take it away from you now, you have no standing. And I think that's important, and I think we can do that, but it isn't free, because a lot of the reforms that were going on when I was debating this with a number of people around the country were free lunches, and meaning that somehow we were going to be able to do this, and it was all going to be free. And I remember speaking to a congressman who's now a senator. I was in his office, and his name was Jim, but it doesn't matter which one. And a good guy, this is a very good guy. And I said, you know, Jim, this program you have is a free lunch. And he said, I know that, but we can't get anything in Congress that isn't free. And when we get it through, 2 Congresses from now, they'll have to start to pay for it. Then we'll recognize that it's not free. But we can't pass it if it doesn't appear to be free. I'm hoping by now we've educated the public so they don't want something passed that everyone thinks is going to be free. That's what all these other programs, that's how we got those programs. They're not free. They're going to be expensive. We can find a way to make them, to make it pay, but somebody is going to have to pay something to solve these problems.
Congressman Brady, my father served in the Navy during the Second World War, and that was 65 years ago. The Korean War was about 60 years ago. And, you know, we've got troops all around the world in, 700 bases. We've got 50,000 troops in Italy, 100,000 in Germany, 75,000 in Korea. Aren't we just supporting their economy rather than supporting our own economy unnecessarily?
There is no question. It is a time to rethink our missions and our roles around the world. We simply can't be the policeman for this world. Each of those bases and missions at one time were critical, but we should be unafraid to look at and revisit our role, our missions, our dollars, our bases in every corner of the world. It's time. It's just time. What do you think? Okay. And I'll tell you what, and I'm 100% pro-defense voting record all the way across the board. My little brother, Command Sergeant Major, runs the hospital at Fort Bliss in El Paso. We are a military family from father on. But we waste money at the Pentagon, and we can't afford that anymore. So.
Let me add one thing quickly. We've had a domestic base closing commission, which, by the way, was a recommendation of the Grace Commission that we promoted through Citizens Against Government Waste for many years. It was Dick Armey, in fact, that first proposed that and finally got it through. I think they've had 3 or 4 rounds. I don't recall if it's 4. We have not done that for overseas bases, which really should be easier to close because those people aren't voting for members of Congress.
Well, we think, we hope, yeah.
Not the
We better look into that one. We just want the military to be able to vote for us.
I wasn't excluding them, please.
Kevin, there's a big debate about raising the debt limit.
Yeah.
Where does that come? Where does that go for or against it?
Run that by me again, the last part.
The debt limit. Where are we with that?
Well, it's. I think it's going to hit in a serious way. I think not March or April, as the administration says. I think it's really later than that. And they have the opportunity, using tools in the past, to be able to extend that. But ultimately, you've got to pay those debts. And sort of looking at our bills, the debt limit is what this country has incurred. The continuing resolution is the funding for this year, the budget for the years going forward. Every one of them I see as an opportunity to eat that elephant, to go on, to look for reform, for savings cuts, all that. Again, I keep going back to this, but you got to start cutting up the credit cards. You can't just increase the limit and say, we'll come back and do it in another year. We just cannot do that anymore. Cannot as a country do that. So we're in the House. Conservatives were already starting to work on what we think that leverage and fight ought to be about. What do you think? Yeah. Yeah. Next question. Who's got? Oh, okay.
Congressman, this kind of falls back to the Department of Health and some other issues that I see you listed on the House Accountability Checklist. Y'all got the new bill that says that any bill brought to the floor has to be proven to be constitutional.
Yeah.
With a letter. I want to know, is there any way to get that to be retroactive to every other department we have in the government? I'm correct? We employ on our liability side of the people's economy about 2.1 million plus employees in the government. Is that right?
How many?
Around 2.1 million,
Probably.
somewhere in there?
Yeah.
Okay. This constitutionality issue, I'm 45, and I'm having huge issues with everything we have going on in the government that doesn't fall under that guise.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's the crux of every single problem everybody in here is talking about. So can we get that to go backwards and go back and have to recheck the departments we already have, the NEA, the Department of Health, the Department of Human Resources, all of this? Can we get that all opened up?
That is actually not that far-fetched because we fund as a government hundreds of programs that have never been authorized by Congress or the Constitution. Literally has never by law been created. And one of the conversations that Tom Schatz has influenced the new appropriations chairman is he's targeting those programs that never should have started in the first place for elimination. And that first bill we did the other day, they started 149 federal programs are being eliminated in that bill. But it actually, what you're saying is actually sort of the template for looking at all these programs.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, though, but presidents throughout history who've decided to have a particular pet project, regardless of constitutionality, who created it. There's a budget act in the early 70s, before I was 10 years old, 74 or somewhere, that stopped any president from being able to stop funding it without congressional help. Yeah. You can create it, but you can't kill it. Am I understanding that correctly?
No. Yeah, the president can create it but not kill it. Right. I don't know. Tom?
Well, they still have the ability. The president can send a list of programs he doesn't want to fund, and that's the way that they kill a program. In his subsequent budget, he is allowed to propose rescissions, and the difference is how they voted on it. One was a disapproval, one was an approval, and the disapproval was part of the problem with this legislative line item veto, as it's called. So there's an effort now to restore this ability for Congress to veto a bill, for the president to have a line item veto authority that is constitutional. And I honestly don't care which president gets it. It was the Republicans that gave it to Bill Clinton. He only cut it out about $3 million, as I recall. But they at least said, we want that to change back from 1974, where they did take away the authority of the president to withhold spending under certain circumstances. And your other idea, by the way, you could create a good list of programs, and rather than citing the constitutional authority to bring them to the floor, you cite the lack of constitutional authority and say, we shouldn't have done this in the first place. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, it is.
Hello, Congressman Brady.
Hey there.
I'm reaching way out here in what my solution is, but we have agencies that have been created that create their own incomes by the policies that they generate. And Child Protective Services is one of those agencies. And I feel like we need to eliminate that agency and put it back into the hands of churches and concerned citizens. Now, I've done my due diligence, and the agency is not supporting its cause. All it is an expenditure. And I want to tell you that we live in a day now where you can be charged. I'm living proof. You can be charged with child neglect, and they will not give you a hearing. They deny you a hearing. Okay? That agency needs to go away.
Okay. Can I make a suggestion? That one's done at the state level here in Texas. really would recommend you get with Senator Williams, Senator Eisler, or Representative Eisler, and other representatives here in Montgomery County. And let me take a look at it from the federal level as well. Okay? Thanks. We've got some folks up front here as well.
Kevin, one thing that I don't think we're really looking at here is the income side of the budget. And where I'm really thinking on this is just the conversation you had about net interest, where those might be sort of funny numbers, like low projections for interest rates. Yeah. On the revenue side, and believe me, we all want low taxes. And like Ronald Reagan proved, you can lower taxes and increase revenues dramatically. But we're not hearing that here. And my concern is, with a weak economy, and who knows how many people are unemployed and underemployed, and now what we're facing with higher fuel cost that could be going up tremendously and weakening the economy and weakening the dollar further, and the Federal Reserve out of control. Any revenue projections, at least to me personally, I haven't seen them tonight really, maybe one or two, are probably meaningless. So when you throw and I'm not talking about you per se, but when that administration puts up a spending budget, I mean, what are the numbers that they think that they're going to get in revenues? And obviously it's still debt and deficit out of control.
The two thoughts. One is that, they're counting on revenues are going to bounce back some from this recession. As the economy finally recovers, despite the stimulus, it's going to generate more revenues. And they are looking at taxing at least $1.6 trillion in higher taxes. But your point is the real point, is that no matter how high you tax this country, people change their behavior, companies change their behaviors, and the rule of thumb is it tends to settle in at 19% or so of our economy. And whether the marginal tax rates are at 90% or 36%, so when you lower capital gains, it increases. When you lower taxes on capital, that drives as well. So if your point is those are funny numbers just raising taxes, you're exactly right. And the truth of the matter is you can't tax your way back to a balanced budget, literally. We could double everyone's taxes in America today, we'd still be running a deficit. Last year, the year before, next year as well. I mean, you literally can't tax your way back there. And I always like to point out, for those who say we should tax the wealthy, that right now the wealthy carry a huge burden of our federal government. The top 1% of earners pay almost 40% of our government. The top 10%, and many in this room, shoulder, at this point, almost 3/4 of the federal government as it is today. And so you cannot tax your way back to a balanced budget, and it's the wrong solution to the economy anyway. Our competitors, by the way, I heard the President say the Union talk about we need to compete to win across the world. Well, our competitors are taking a page from our playbook, lower taxes, less regulation, more skilled workforce, and beating us on the head with it on corporate tax rates, research and development, just a number of areas. So the answer for 1,000 reasons is you can't tax your way back to a balanced budget. It's all spending. You've got to focus on spending. Okay, great. Right here.
Thank you.
Tell you what, why don't we get this one? Yes, sir.
Yes. Kevin, when will we have an honest, open public debate addressing the government's failure to address the problem of illegal aliens in this country? Because it makes taxpayers like me real cynical to know that our federal government is not making a good faith effort to do that. And then second of all, the impact that it has on the economy and our deficit.
I read in the paper. I read in the paper each day what a wonderful job this government is doing on securing our borders. But in states like Texas, we know better. And to drive the point home, the other day we had members of our Farm Bureau up in Washington, and they have in the past pushed for a comprehensive immigration reform. In truth, in the ag workers, there needs to be some changes, no question about that. But they started their conversation with me saying, And I expect them to lead with immigration again. And they said, we don't want to talk about that. We want to talk about securing the borders, because our ranchers on the Texas border are seeing violence, and the numbers of crossings, smuggling humans and drugs and other things across their land has increased so dramatically. And the safety precautions they have to take on for their homes and their ranches and their families are unprecedented. And so even those who pushed for, quote, the comprehensive, have now realized that until you secure the borders, until you shut down that back door of illegal immigration, you can't control the future going forward. So I'm hopeful in the House versions of our bills, we're going to put a priority on border security, but in a smart way, knowing, again, we've got to look for the inefficiency and the wasted dollars and the way we protect our border. And I still think, at the end of the day, that if you don't make employers play by the rules in hiring workers, no matter what you do at the border, will never be enough. If you don't shut off that magnet of jobs, especially for companies who are playing by the rules and their competitors are not, until we shut off that magnet, we're not going to have that back door shut. And I will tell you, too, and I've said this before, I know it is a hot button issue in Washington, but I am a supporter of moving through the courts the revisit of our anchor babies. Those who come here for the sole reason of doing that. I really think it's time to resolve that issue. And and Tom, if you want to weigh in on any of these.
Well, I would say, I know the immigration is a very big issue, but for something like Social Security, and especially Social Security, and to the extent that illegal immigrants come in, they send money to Social Security. They never collect anything. They actually, the ones who actually do that with false Social Security cards, there is it's not real money, but there's an escrow doesn't have money because the Treasury's already spent the money. But it's a huge amount of these people have sent in. They're never going to collect because the Social Security numbers they have, you can't find them the next year. Now, that in a sense is helpful. I'm not suggesting that's good, because an awful lot of as we know, especially for the border states, you get a huge amount of illegal immigrants that don't do that and absorb a huge amount of health care and education. So we know we have those. We have all those issues too, and we have law enforcement. But that's largely the drug trade, and we can't, we're not solving that here.
And I'm not from Texas, so I'm not going to comment.
Got to jump in there. One more. And then what we're going to do is take another question. I'd like to ask our guests if they would like to make concluding remarks, and then I want to ask your help in this fight going forward.
Thank you, Congressman Brady,
Yes, sir.
for allowing me to ask you a question. I'm 61 years old, and I've had major health issues over the last 13 years. Had 9 heart attacks. I had health insurance when I got a job. I quit my job and went and visited myself because I had a pre-existing condition I couldn't get insurance. Now my question is this: I'm not for Obamacare at all. But my question is this: what incentive does any medical person have to keep the price of medicine affordable to the average citizen? There is no incentive at all. There's hospital districts that disallow doctors who might want to go down the street and open up a hospital in competition to the local hospital. There is no incentive there to let these doctors open a hospital to create competition to keep prices competitive. Now, what's going on here? I can remember, like my parents used to talk about anybody that had health insurance. The health insurance in my parents' generation was considered to be a luxury item. But after 1965, after Lyndon Johnson got through with this Medicare and Medicaid programs that he set up, all of a sudden health insurance became a necessity. Now, I think we need to look at that. Why don't we just do away with this Medicare and Medicaid program and just put the money back into people's pockets where we can afford to pay our own health insurance?
Good. Okay. Is there another question I can take? No. Couple points, and you wrote in your Fast Feed book about feedback about having real businesses design the healthcare system rather than government doing. A couple thoughts. One, in Texas, obviously, you don't need a certificate need to open a hospitals. That's why we're fortunate. We have many more and more access than a lot of states have. Secondly, on the bigger question of incentives, Obamacare got everything wrong in healthcare. You know, the incentives were for employees. As you know, the heart of this is every individual must have government-approved health care or pay a tax. Fine. Almost every business has to offer government-approved health care or face a tax or fine. Businesses know if you offer health care today but it's not government-approved, you face a fine of up to $3,000 per worker. But if you don't offer health care at all, you only pay a fine of $2,000 a worker. Think of that incentive. And I know businesses in this room who have already run the numbers and realize it is far cheaper to push their workers into the exchanges, which are going to drive up those costs. The other incentives on the other side, this unconstitutional mandate, we know they've set these fines for people not have health care. It's mirrored on the Massachusetts plan. In Massachusetts, we already know what happened. Yes, the coverage went up to 95, 96% of coverage in Massachusetts. Healthcare didn't get cheaper, it got more expensive. Mandates drove it up. More emergency room visits, 10%, almost 9% more emergency room visits. And here's the point. New people buying healthcare bought premiums for 5 months, and then they dropped out. They bought it when they got sick because there was no incentive to buy it otherwise. Used it when they got sick, drove up the price, and then left it. And so I guess to the bigger point of government getting the incentives all wrong, we've done it time and time again in this new health care plan. And that's why we want to repeal it and replace it with real common sense reforms. That was a bigger issue onto the hospital issue, but it all ties in. Tom Schatz and Tom Savings, could you give us your thoughts as we go forward in this effort?
I think everything that's been said here tonight needs to be said 1 million times to everybody you know, because this has to get spread around the country. We need everyone to understand what needs to be done, and we need to create more people with backbone in Washington. Because right now, speaking of incentives, if the incentive is to spend more money, they're going to spend more money. And if they think they're going to get reelected by saving money, we'll be saving a lot of money. And we have started to get that message across. This new process, not new, it's the process that really should have been here all along. The ability to offer these amendments. If you have an idea, send it to Congressman Brady, send it to your senators, send it around the country. If 25 members of Congress get the same idea and they all think it's a good one, you've got 25 more votes than you had before. So it isn't just the members that need to stay involved. You know, I've often said in some ways it's your fault, not you in this room, but maybe. You know, it is. Because they will do what, if enough of us ask them to do this, and they think that they're responding, they will respond. Because the response in the past has been, oh, let's go spend more money and get reelected. And one of the reasons Republicans got in trouble is that in 95, when they took over, the Speaker of the House at that time, Newt Gingrich, told the subcommittee chairman on the Appropriations Committee, who were called cardinals for a good reason, to start sticking these earmarks into the districts of vulnerable Republican freshmen. The earmarks went from $7.8 billion in 1994 to $29 billion in 2006. And I had this discussion with then Minority Leader John Boehner before he became Speaker, saying, you all can't bring back earmarks. And they had the spending part right, but they were a little wishy-washy about doing earmarks. And everyone sent a strong message in November. And as I said earlier, and I can't repeat it enough, don't stop. So I want to thank all of you for doing what you've done, but keep it up.
Tom, thanks for joining us today, all the way from Washington.
The real issue is, in general, and this is a wonderful group to see, because when the real bosses of private firms are customers, The person running the firm has really no power. If customers don't show up, they're out of business. If voters don't show up, these guys are out of business. But the problem is none of us have a big enough stake in any one of these games to really care about it. So we don't care about it. And the people who do have a stake in the game, and that's why the health care bill looks the way it does. It looks exactly like that because the people who had a stake in the game, who cared about it, like the AMA came out for it, or the hospitals, so those are the people with a stake in the game. We have too small a stake to do it. We have to be, the 300 million people have to care what these things cost to make those people bid for your services. And it can be done. We can see a sign that says, come to MD Anderson, $99 a day, everything included. It can work. We can do it.
Dr. Sabin, thank you again for your leadership on Social Security and Medicare. I'm going to piggyback on what just got said. The reason we're kicking off these series of town hall meetings on spending and deficits is that we can't do this without you. Truth is, we're in a big battle in Washington for the hearts and minds of the American public. And you've already seen the narrative in Washington. You know, if we make any cuts, no matter 1/1000th of the budget, it'll decimate our local services, lay people off, damage our economy. You may have read Mark Zandi estimated that if we make those minor cuts in H.R. 1, in the Republican savings, it would cost America 700,000 jobs. That's what they're selling all around the country in meetings like this right now. Truth of the matter is, Mark Zandi was the one who told us if we pass that stimulus, it would create 4 million jobs by the end of 2010. Guess what? We had lost 3 million jobs in that same period. But they're going to sell that story over and over and over again. Think back in the past year and a half. We won the battle on Obamacare through town hall meetings, through social networking, through getting our neighbors involved. We won the battle on stimulus, pointed out the fake jobs and the fake congressional districts and how it wasn't generating the economy. We won the battle on taxes, to extend taxes for all Americans, not just a few, because all of you are engaged. Well, we're not going to win. I already know now, we're not going to win this battle if we don't have you fighting full-time with this message in this community, in other lawmakers in Houston, in Texas, with friends and family, just like we did on the health care debate. So I'm asking you, 1, to give me feedback on going forward on some of the budget cuts we need to make. 2, give us your name and email. Let us know if you're willing to help, because we've got in this country, in this republic, it all starts with you, and I already know where some lawmakers are starting to back off, and we need you and your friends and families in other districts pushing them right back into the yes column on these cuts. So help us out. Help us win this battle. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm going to stay around for a few more minutes if you want to visit. And again, thank you tonight.